Yeshikoch, Madeline. Your Devar Torah was really moving to me, I'll tell you, because you're exploring the hiddenness of God. Why is God so hidden from us? And also the experience of being human and facing the unknown. And between that hiddenness and the not knowingness of human experience, the need for trust. And you ended by saying the best part of life are surprises. Here we have, as you described for us, a story of surprise. The scouts are surprised that the promised land is a frightening place with looming giants. Why would God, whom they trusted, promise them a land like this with these terrifying people in it? Caleb and Joshua are surprised that the other 10 scouts are going to bring back this report because what they see is a land flowing with milk and honey, a land that is entirely conquerable with God's help. God is shocked and surprised that the 10 scouts could possibly doubt God's power after the miracles of the splitting of the sea, of the manna, of Mount Sinai, and most importantly, the miracle of defeating Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler in the region, with the 10 plagues. What possibly could these scouts be afraid of if they had God on their side? Moses and God are also stunned and disappointed with the people who raise their voices in a loud cry that they should never have left Egypt and immediately start planning a return there to slavery. Just after they start stoning Joshua and Caleb, and possibly also, it seems, God's cloud of glory in the midst. Everyone in this story is surprised. But from our perspective, it all seems entirely predictable and even preventable. Not only could God have prepared and reassured them for what they would be encountering in the promised land, as you point out, Madeline, but the whole idea of a scouting expedition in the first place was unnecessary. Don't you scout something that you're unsure about? This was the promised land. God promised them this land. Couldn't they just trust the promise and enter the land with God as their lead? What was the need to scout it first? Shlach lecha, God says to Moses, send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelite people. That's how the verse of this parsha, the first verse, is usually translated. But that's not actually what it says. God doesn't say to Moses, send men to scout the land. God says to Moses, send lecha, for yourself, men to scout the land. What does the lecha, for yourself, mean here? In the Babylonian Talmud, Sota 34b, Reish Lakish says that the lecha means send them yourself at your discretion, but not by my command. In other words, Reish Lakish is arguing that the scouting expedition was Moses' idea, not God's. He goes further to say it was good in the eyes of Moses, but it was not good in the eyes of God. By this theory, God understood that the whole idea of scouting the land was problematic because it implied doubt and perhaps could stir up more. And God probably knew that the scouts would see things that would terrify them. So why didn't God stop Moses from doing this? Rashi points out that verse 13:3 explicitly states that Moses sent the people, quote, by God's command, which Rashi argues means that at very least Moses had God's consent. It may have been Moses' idea, but God did not stop him. Perhaps, as you suggest, Madeline, this was a test of the people to see if they had the mettle for the battle that lay ahead. Perhaps it was a test of their trust in God. Could they see frightening things and still trust in God's power to prevail? That's what Joshua and Caleb saw. The other 10 scouts and the people abysmally failed that test, choosing instead to return to slavery. That moment, that choice to want to return to slavery instead of trusting God to enter the land, is considered by Jewish tradition to be one of the lowest points in our history. It's understood to be that moment, the 9th of Av, presaging and maybe even causing the many calamities that would befall us throughout our history on that date, most notably the destruction of both the first and the second temples in Jerusalem in 586 BCE and 70 CE. Now, as you might recall, there's another Torah portion that has the word lecha in its title. And it is the same construction we find here. Lech lecha, God says to Abraham, sending him on a mission to the promised land to start the Jewish people. Go forth is how it's usually translated, but there too it more accurately means something like go for yourself. The similarity between the command shlach lecha and lech lecha is not the only connection between these two portions. On their mission, the scouts retraced Abraham's steps through the Negev and to Hebron, the place where Abraham built an altar to God more than 400 years earlier, after God promised the land to Abraham's offspring forever. In fact, the Talmud in Sota 34b, in the Talmud there, the rabbis imagine that when the scouts get to Hebron, Caleb goes to the tomb of Abraham in Hebron and prostrates himself there, praying for the help of the, no more battery. I'm going to speak as loudly as I can. Good idea. So in the Talmud, the rabbis imagine, can you hear me? Fabulous. That Caleb, when the scouts are retracing Abraham's steps, Caleb goes to Hebron and prostrates himself at the tomb of Abraham, asking for the patriarch's help in overcoming the lies of the other 10 scouts and their fear. So lech lecha and shlach lecha are paired through the rabbinic imagination at least. And why? Abraham's journey was all about trust in God. Abraham had to leave everything he knew behind him to follow God's promise into the land, a place that was unknown to him. Now, more than 400 years later, his descendants receive a similar command, and they do not have the same trust. Today, many Jews do not believe in God. Never mind trust God to lead us into difficult territory. Madeline brought us a modern response to the question of the hiddenness of God. She brought us the words of Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Berkovitz, who said, responsibility requires freedom, but God's convincing presence would undermine the freedom of human decision. God hides in human responsibility and human freedom. So if that is true, what do we do when we face the unknown? How do we move forward with both trust and responsibility when we are afraid? One answer lies in the idea of surprise. Because every day we have practice with surprise, as none of us can predict what will happen on any day of our lives, and our lives are full of surprises. Our minds are constructed to adapt ourselves and to convince ourselves that surprising things are less surprising than they actually are, because we're seeking homeostasis and stability, but actually every day is full of countless surprises. If instead of just trying to numb out surprise and flatten it, we shifted into a mode of wonder, when we would look out at the world with awe, we would see surprises much more than we do usually. We would see the grandeur that surrounds us and the wonder that is built into the experience of surprise. And if we made that a practice, we would find ourselves more able to trust what we cannot control and take responsibility for what we can. Abraham Joshua Heschel advises, part company with preconceived notions. Suppress your leaning to reiterate and to know in advance of your seeing. Try to see the world for the first time with eyes not dimmed by memory or volition, and you will quickly detect that the ineffable, he says, inhabits the magnificent and the common, the grandiose and the tiny facts of reality alike. Some people sense this quality, he says, at distant intervals in extraordinary events. Others sense it in the ordinary events, in every fold, in every nook, day after day, hour after hour. To them, things are bereft of triteness. They hear the stillness that crowds the world in spite of our noise, in spite of our greed. Slight and simple as things may be, a piece of paper, a morsel of bread, a word, a sigh. They hide and guard a never-ending secret, a glimpse of God, kinship with the spirit of all being. This is what Abraham sensed, and this is what the 10 scouts did not. This is our best bet for living in a world in which we cannot see the future and must both take responsibility and trust in the unknown. In Heschel's words, the search of reason ends at the shore of the known. On the immense expanse beyond it, only the sense of the ineffable can glide. Shabbat Shalom.